Texas Water Development Board. With me today is Tanya Miller, our other board member, and also Brian McMath, Executive Administrator of the Texas Water Development Board. We also have a couple of staff with us to help answer questions. Our interim CFO, Georgia Sanchez, is here, as well as Jessica Pena, our Deputy Executive Administrator for Water Supply and Infrastructure. Members, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss our agency, as well as highlight all of the water needs for Texas. We certainly appreciate the members' interest in water, and the governor has made water an emergency item, and certainly we are seeing the increased need for water infrastructure in Texas. Just real briefly about the Texas Water Development Board. We're a small agency. We were created in 1957. We have really big responsibilities. We have 482 FTEs that focus every day and are committed every day to securing the state's water future. And we focus on securing the water future for the 31 million Texans we have today, as well as the 51 million that we'll have by 2070. And you've heard several folks mention today the number of folks who are moving to Texas every day. As for Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, I am L'Oreal Stepney, Chairwoman of the Texas Water Development Board. With me today is Tanya Miller, our other board member, and also Brian McMath, Executive Administrator of the Texas Water Development Board. We also have a couple of staff with us to help answer questions. Our interim CFO, Georgia Sanchez, is here, as well as Jessica Pena, our Deputy Executive Administrator for Water Supply and Infrastructure. Members, thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss our agency, as well as highlight all of the water needs for Texas. We certainly appreciate the members' interest in water, and the governor has made water an emergency item, and certainly we are seeing the increased need for water infrastructure in Texas. Just real briefly about the Texas Water Development Board. We're a small agency. We were created in 1957. We have really big responsibilities. We have 482 FTEs that focus every day and are committed every day to securing the state's water future. And we focus on securing the water future for the 31 million Texans we have today, as well as the 51 million that we'll have by 2070. And you've heard several folks mention today the number of folks who are moving to Texas every day, as well as, of course, we are the 8th largest economy in Texas, and all of these needs and communities and businesses and agriculture all need water to sustain the communities. Our agency has 3 major responsibilities. The first is science. We collect and disseminate water-related data. Planning, and I'll talk about planning briefly in just a moment, but we assist with regional water supply and flood planning efforts, ultimately with the adoption of a state water plan and a state flood plan. And then financing. We're a water bank. Many of your communities may have taken advantage and applied for some of our financial assistance programs, and we take a lot of pride in being able to help communities. A lot of times they're in pretty dire straits, and it's a privilege for us to try to find cost-effective financial programs to help them with their water supply needs. And it's not only drinking water, but wastewater, flood control, agriculture and conservation projects are things that we look to fund and work with communities every day to accomplish their goals. On slide 3, you can see has several graphs. I just want to point out a few key metrics. As I've mentioned, by 2070, the state will reach 51 million folks, and the time to plan for water needs is now. We've seen, and you all know, that we're a state that sometimes we have really severe droughts. We had one from 2009 to 2015. Sometimes we have major floods, and the time to plan for our water needs is now. You can also see from the second graph towards the bottom that by 2060, our municipal demand for water will far exceed irrigation. Our surface water supply is remaining relatively flat, but we're seeing a decrease in our groundwater supply. All of these things really echo the need for water infrastructure. We need, in my mind, we need two buckets of water. We need water for finding new supply, new sources of water, and then we need water to firm up our existing infrastructure. All of you have seen the boil water notices that are certainly a frustration for our communities. Some of our communities have to drill new wells, or they're just at capacity because population has increased so much that they need to expand their drinking water plants, or they have sanitary sewer overflows. All of these things are a reflection of aging infrastructure and growing population demand and the need for water. So at the Texas Water Development Board, we look at all of those things. On slide 4, I want to make sure I mention for the committee our state water planning process. It's a great process. It's a bottom-up approach. We work with 16 regional groups, volunteer members. The state is divided into these 16 regions, and what's great about it is they know their communities, they look at the water demands, population projections, and they identify any shortages that may exist and identify potential solutions to fill those shortages. What's also great about the state water plan is an adaptive management process. Every 5 years, we work with the communities as well as the state demographer and other Texas experts to update the state water plan. As a snapshot, Texas needs about 7 million acre feet of additional water by 2070 based on the estimated shortage during a drought worse than the drought of record. So we do 50 years worth of planning, and we plan for worst case conditions. For most of Texas, that's the drought in the 1950s, although we've seen some really severe droughts like the one-year drought of record in 2011. But these are the things that we plan for. I also want to mention that there are 6 user groups that are covered by the state water plan: municipal irrigation, manufacturing, livestock, mining, and steam electric power, all critical to our economy and to our communities. And the goal of the plan is to support the Texas communities and Texas economy. On slide 5, I want to mention the state, our second planning process, the new state flood plan. The legislature tasked the Texas Water Development Board to use a similar process to come up with our first ever state flood plan. The plan was approved in August of 2024. And again, it's a bottom-up approach divided into 15 regional groups based on watershed, flood conditions, and watershed boundaries. The ultimate goal of the flood plan is to identify ways to reduce risk, the risk of loss of life and property. Very, very important. We want to thank all of the 15 regional flood planning groups and 350 volunteers, over 500 meetings, time and effort put into developing a great document that we can all use as a roadmap. Both of the planning documents are up on our website. The planning meetings are public. Your constituents can participate in the planning process, but we think it's very, very important. And we've all experienced flood. It looks different depending on where you are in Texas. In an urban area, maybe a small creek that turns into a raging river. In the valley, maybe the Resaca's that overflow. Or up in the Panhandle, and maybe Playa Lakes, where the flooding stays around for weeks on end. But very important effort for the state to have the flood plan. On the next slide, I wanted to mention the cost of water infrastructure. The state flood plan identified $54.5 billion in estimated costs for the solutions to help reduce risk, the flood risk in the state. 1 in 6 Texans live or work in a flood hazard area, so it's a significant issue for the state. The legislature provided $1.4 billion over 2 legislative sessions to fund flood studies, evaluations, projects, and the board has committed nearly $700 million of those funds, and that was a one-time appropriation, 2 one-time appropriations. With respect, you'll see the small buckets on the infograph there. With respect to the state water plan, it identifies a cost of $80 billion to fund the projects in the state water plan. And those are in 2018 dollars. Now, the committee has heard from the different infrastructure, like TxDOT a few minutes ago, about the cost of infrastructure. It's just gone exponential. And so we're in the process of developing the 2027 state water plan. And so we anticipate, of course, the cost may go up. We see it in board meetings. We see lots of projects with overruns coming to the board for additional funding. So the state portion of that is $47 billion. And again, that's to generate enough water to meet our water demands and population demands in the future. And then also, I want to talk about federal funds. We get a significant portion of federal funds that are appropriated by Congress, passed through EPA to the states. And I want to talk about two of those because they really are the workhorse and a mainstay of our existing infrastructure, although new infrastructure can be put in under these programs. But a lot of times what we see under the state revolving funds, we see systems that are in enforcement with Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, have compliance issues. We see systems that have capacity issues. We see systems that the water quality, maybe there's a constituent in the water that is not, makes the water not at meet drinking water standards, or drilling new wells, things like that, putting in distribution lines. So with the state revolving funds, there's two of them. There's Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and then there's the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, typically for wastewater applications. What we're seeing is basically there's $4.2 billion in need for 2025 for drinking water, and for clean water, there's $4.1 billion. But we only have about a little over $400 million each in those pockets of money. So we have this much money and this much need, basically. So about $8 billion of need for both of those programs combined. And so we also have to match these federal CAP grants every year. And so we do have an exceptional item for that. But in general, we try to look at these programs every year. Both are 9 and 10 times oversubscribed. And so, what we're seeing is I think it illustrates the need for water infrastructure in Texas. And we do want to also say thank you to the committee. We noticed there was $2.5 billion in the House budget bill. And so thank you for your interest and notice of water. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian McMath, who's our Executive Administrator, to finish the presentation. So,
thank you, Chairwoman Stepney, Chairman Bonin, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brian McMath. I'm the Executive Administrator at the Texas Water Development Board. Chairwoman Stepney just highlighted the tremendous need that we see throughout the water, wastewater, and flood spaces. So over the next few slides, I'd like to highlight some of our major financial assistance programs, just to show you kind of the capacity limits and what we're able to do with current funding amounts. So on slide 8, you see a snapshot from our SWIFT program. SWIFT was created in 2013, and it is our flagship new water supply program. These projects are in the state water plan that Chairwoman Stepney mentioned, and we provide subsidized loans. We raise capital through bonding, and we have a fund, the SWIFT fund, that we can use for accessing capital for those subsidies. I think if you look at the chart, some key columns, we've had to date 11 bond issuances. We've raised, we're able to commit nearly $11.5 billion in new water supply projects. But the last column is probably the most noteworthy. Through this very innovative financing structure, we've been able to save communities, ratepayers, over $1.7 billion in the cost of financing for those projects. The next slide highlights our Flood Infrastructure Fund program. Chairwoman Stepney mentioned that from 2019, and then again last session, we've been appropriated about $1.4 billion towards flood mitigation projects, and we've been able to commit about half of that. Last session, with the additional $625 million that was appropriated, we've basically split that amount in half. We've used some unused funds from the initial appropriation, and we're allocating about $375 million towards the current flood needs. We identify those needs through a document called an intended use plan. You can think of this as like a guidebook that we use to provide to communities outlining how they can apply for these funds, information that we need to rank those projects, and then we can start going down the list with available funds. But as Chairwoman Stepney mentioned on a previous slide, this last solicitation, the most recent flood IUP, have identified over $2 billion worth of projects. Those are projects that communities are ready to go forward with, primarily flood mitigation construction projects, but some evaluations, studies, and you will see some smaller projects. We call those immediate effect projects. You can think of like low water crossing signage, emergency alert systems, communities can implement sooner rather than later. On slide 10, provides a snapshot, of the Texas Water Fund. Last session, with the passage of Senate Bill 28 and approval by the voters, the legislature created the Texas Water Fund. This is essentially a master fund that was created for the legislature to appropriate funds into, and then our board can then allocate those funds into our various financial assistance programs. Almost all of our programs are eligible for Texas Water Fund allocations. We cannot use that for our economically distressed areas program, but that's okay. That's a kind of a special niche program that we operate for economically distressed areas for first-time water and wastewater. We also cannot use water fund money for our Ag Conservation Fund. And Chairwoman Stepney mentioned an exceptional item that we have for our state match for our SRFs. We also have an exceptional item related to our Ag Fund, trying to get additional funding into that program for ag producers throughout the state. The Flood Infrastructure Fund is not currently allowed for Texas Water Fund allocations, but I believe you will see legislation. Legislation has been filed, I know, on the Senate side to make that program eligible. But the first tranche of money, we got $1 billion last session that was appropriated. $250 million of that is for the new water supply for Texas Fund. That's for specific projects. Think of desal, think of out-of-state water, produced water, or even aquifer storage and recovery. So innovative water projects that fund is specifically targeted to address. The remaining $750 million, as highlighted on this chart, we were able to target water conservation and water loss projects for communities of various sizes. And you'll see different population amounts and different allocated dollar amounts to address communities up to 1,000, communities up to 10,000, and communities up to 150,000. One of the statutory priorities established in Senate Bill 28 last session was to address these very communities, up to 150,000 for water loss and conservation. We were also able to identify some high-risk and high-need communities. Frankly, members, these are communities that have no other options. And so through the work of our staff working with these communities, trying to identify affordable options for them, with the generous appropriation last session of the Water Fund, we were able to address some, not all, but some of those the most riskiest, most neediest communities. We were also able to use this money to support the SWIFT program that I mentioned earlier. The Texas Treasury Safekeeping Trust Company manages the $2 billion investment that the legislature made in 2013. Through their active management and investment of those funds, that $2 billion stands at over $1.8 billion now. It may even be close to $1.9 billion as we speak. They do a tremendous job of investing those funds, but by utilizing Texas Water Fund capital, we were able to use this money instead of relying on that fund to subsidize those loans in our last SWIFT program year. That's incredibly important to enhance our future capacity in SWIFT because it's been an incredibly successful program to date. Chairwoman Stepney mentioned that our most current state water plan, we're still relying on 2018 estimates for those projects, and we expect with the forthcoming 2027 state water plan, those cost estimates, whether it's state financial assistance needed or total capital costs, are going to be considerably more. And so everything that we can do together with the legislature to enhance the long-term sustainability of the SWIFT program is vital in addressing our future water supply needs. Finally, Chairwoman Stepney mentioned our state revolving fund, or SRF, programs. These are federal programs that we administer to address drinking water and clean water. You can think of wastewater or sewage type projects. Through the IIJA, I know TxDOT spoke of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act that was signed into law in 2021. We have received additional funds from the federal government to address not only our base program, so those regular drinking water, those regular clean water programs, but also some additional new kind of specialty programs to address lead service line replacement, as well as addressing emerging contaminants. We see, working with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, working with the federal EPA, we see a number of new emerging contaminants in our water supply system. And so through utilization of these additional dollars, we're able to work with communities and provide this targeted funding to address those new constituents in their water supply. So slide 11 just shows you to date the additional IIJA funds that we've received for drinking water SRF, both in our base program, lead service line replacement, and emerging contaminants. And then finally, slide 12 shows you similar additional IIJ funds that we've received in our clean water SRF just for base and emerging contaminants. There's no corresponding lead service line replacement program within the clean water SRF. That concludes my part of the presentation, and I believe that Chairwoman Stepney and I are happy to entertain any questions.
All right. Representative De Ayala.
Yes, Mr. McMath, thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to set a time to visit with you, not to keep everyone here too long, but you'd mentioned in passing a Senate bill that would allow or propose something. I didn't quite catch what that was.
Yes, sir. So currently, the Texas Water Fund, the master fund that was created last session and $1 billion was appropriated into, we can allocate those dollars into most of our financial assistance programs, but not all. And there is a proposal by Senator Perry to add the Flood Infrastructure Fund under the Texas Water Fund. So additional money that is appropriated into the water fund, our board could then identify the various priorities throughout the suite of our financial assistance programs and use those same dollars to supplement flood mitigation.
Thank you for all this. This is enlightening, and I just would like to schedule a visit sometime here in the next few days, maybe next week.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All right. Representative Berry.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you all for coming out today. I appreciate all the information. It's been greatly helpful, and your staff has been helpful to my office as well. So thanks again for that.
Thank you.
I just have a couple questions, and they're toss-ups for the most part. How many of the funds that you mentioned recently in this presentation are oversubscribed?
Yes, sir. So definitely our clean and drinking water, SRFs, drinking water, currently based on the applications that we've received and the estimated capacity we have is 10 times oversubscribed.
Yeah.
Our clean water SRF is about 9 times oversubscribed. These are for sewage projects.
Yeah.
Our flood infrastructure fund, based on projects that we've received applications for, currently ready to go at $2 billion. We've got for this biennium about 375 in available capacity. So that's about 5 times oversubscribed. Fortunately, we do not consider our SWIFT program as oversubscribed. That means that our board, through active management of the program, has never been forced to draw a line, which is what we have to do in our oversubscribed programs, and tell a handful of communities yes, and then the remainder, we either tell them no, or actually we tell them keep trying, come back next year, and hopefully we can fund your projects at that time. But those are 3 of our major financial assistance programs that we do provide a tremendous amount of financial assistance through that are oversubscribed.
And if I could add, thank you, Brian, for
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
With our SWIFT program, we just received, what was it, $5 billion worth of project information forms. So folks expressing an interest to participate this year.
And again, those are for cities with less than 150,000 in population, right? Or up to 150,000 in population.
No, that population limit was established in Senate Bill 28 just as a kind of a legislative priority or a guide on how we could target those initial dollars. We used 2 programs, one, the Water Loan Assistance Fund and the Rural Water Assistance Fund to target those communities. Those are financial assistance programs that we didn't have funding for prior to the Water Fund. So we were able to dust those programs off and utilize their structure, which is intended for those tiny communities up to 1,000, those small communities up to 10,000, those medium size up to 150,000. Those programs are not technically oversubscribed, but I would suggest that should we have ample funding and we go out for a solicitation, let's say we solicit, water infrastructure projects for communities up to $10,000, we could set the terms, whether grants or loans. I would not be surprised, sir, if we saw tremendous interest in that financing, and so at that time, we could determine an annual oversubscription rate.
And 10,000 population.
Yes.
Yeah, I worry about those smaller communities having the tax base in order to repay some of those loans. But it is nice that we were able to use our AAA rating to support those and get them most favorable pricing there. Can you tell me how many of these funds address wastewater?
Primarily our clean water SRF. That's where we do a majority of our wastewater projects.
Yeah. And that's concerning as well for me because I'm in a small town just south of Houston. We have about 140,000 people in our town. But we recently had to do an expansion of our wastewater system. Just one plant was $267 million. So for some of these smaller towns, I would consider ourselves a mid-sized town. For some of those small to medium-sized towns out there, it is a very expensive endeavor to do these things. So it concerns me as well for some of those cities that don't necessarily have the financial standing to go out and get these loans. They still have to treat this water in some way, shape, or form. So that's concerning as well. So that concludes my questions.
Yes, sir, if I may. We do have other financial assistance programs that communities can utilize for wastewater financing. But the advantage of the SRF, the Clean Water SRF, is there's subsidized loans. There is some principal forgiveness. You can think of that as free money. Whereas, for example, our development fund, it's just best market rate based on our AAA. And so, to your point, with the extraordinary costs related to some of these projects, with limited ability of ratepayers to pay more to finance those, the options are or can be limited, which just underscores, and this came up in your sister committee on the Senate side, so many communities need low-cost financing. So as you deliberate the budget, I know, considering what's already been considered in the introduced version, it is paramount to address these needs, both water,
Yeah, and so-
wastewater, and flood.
So the flip side of that is infrastructure. You talked a lot about infrastructure early on in your presentation, and infrastructure is a big issue because by the time we have our new water coming online in the next 5 to 10 years, because it's going to take that long to develop those big projects, hopefully we can have some substantial infrastructure projects done so that we're not losing as much water in some cities as we're utilizing in others. And I don't want to get into specific numbers there, but there are significant amounts of water being lost within our utility system just due to leaking pipes and stuff like that. And I think Prop 6 in the last session was really trying to address some of that because a majority of their money was allocated for that. But again, oversubscription to that makes it a little bit difficult. So thanks again. That concludes my questions today.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all coming out.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Walling?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairwoman, congratulations on the new position. Brian, good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Having worked with the agency for many years now, or not many, but a significant time, intimately getting to know what the agency does and doesn't do, what they fund and don't fund. As you know, Brian, you know where the city that I represent, part of it is in the city of Houston proper, but the other half is in an unincorporated Harris County where we don't have any water, wastewater services. The water in unincorporated Harris County, either by MUD or by an investor-owned utility, IOU, or you have a well and a septic tank system, right? So it would be like if you were in any rural community, and that's unfortunate. But I want to focus my questions, particularly to the city of Houston. And what I understand from meeting with my public works people in the mayor's office is that they don't necessarily qualify for Water Development Board programs to improve aging infrastructure. Is that statement correct, or can we get clarification on that?
Yeah, they certainly qualify for financing, but I think, unfortunately, without specific enforcement issues, their applications are often down list. And so with our limited capacity, let's say in our drinking water SRF or our clean water SRF, and if they need to replace aging infrastructure, and we see this for communities throughout the state, whether they're large metropolitan areas or small rural communities, those federal programs were created to address, as Chairwoman Stepney mentioned, to address enforcement actions. On the drinking water side, clean water, if you're on an impaired watershed, we don't want wastewater treatment plants putting treated water into impaired watersheds. And so those programs were kind of created to address those specific needs, yet, as the chairwoman mentioned, there are workhorse programs for infrastructure. And so a lot of communities like Houston and others rely on those programs to replace that infrastructure, yet if they're not under enforcement, they're too far down the list. We try to work with them to identify other financial assistance programs like our D-Fund, but there are limits to that program as well.
Right, so I guess so to answer the question, and that they don't qualify and they haven't been awarded any assistance on improving the aging infrastructure.
I would have to check specifically. I know that Senator Alvarado asked similar questions in Senate Finance recently, running a report of active projects in her district, which overlaps with yours. There was about $400 million worth of active projects. I can't say specifically if those were infrastructure or if they were new water supply, wastewater, et cetera. So
Okay.
we can check on that for you.
Is it my understanding that SWIFT is particularly for new water supply then? Is that my understanding?
Correct. SWIFT is for new water supply for project in the state water plan.
Okay, and then in that, you have the flood plan, you have the water plan. What, as far as the city of Houston, the surrounding communities in the city of Houston, or Harris County, I'm sorry, they've been active participants in that, in both of those plans. Is that?
Very much so.
Understand.
Those regional water planning groups, and the regional flood planning groups have representatives from municipalities, and I'm certain that Houston is an active participant.
Right. Right, because what's happening in the city of Houston, obviously, there's a lot of leaky pipes.
Yes, sir.
And to the extent that the state, usually most home rule cities can try to take care of their communities on their own. I mean, that's what they're designed to do. But at some point, the need, as was mentioned earlier, the population growth in these larger metropolitan communities, the need for water is important to bring new water systems in, but to incentivize these leaky pipes and trying to fix those leaky pipes is the department looking at that?
Yeah, we have within our Water Science and Conservation Office, we have a team of staff that look at water loss. We do water loss audits. We can provide technical assistance to communities to not only identify but address their water loss. And to your point, I think Representative Berry's as well, it makes no sense to develop new water supply if that new water is then relying on aged, leaky systems to get it from the source to the user. And so I think you'll see going forward a balance, communities not only addressing their future water supply needs, but ensuring that their systems are up to date so that it's efficiently delivered to their customers.
Okay.
And
Yes.
Representative Wally?
Yes, ma'am.
We would be happy to, as Brian mentioned, run a report to show what funding has been provided to your area and the different funding options, if that would be helpful.
That'd be very helpful. I mean, because I guess what I'm hearing from our mayor's office is that we don't qualify for some of the infrastructure dollars, or they haven't been awarded.
And we funded, even large, like Loose Bayou comes to mind, large projects like that. And so we will provide that list to your office.
Okay,
So.
that'd be helpful. Brian, we've had numerous conversations about the cost benefit analysis.
Yes, sir.
And how that hinders communities like ours.
Yes, sir.
And you know how I feel about that.
Yes, sir.
There were some tweaks made to the cost benefit analysis. Could you inform the committee on how that works?
Absolutely.
How it worked previously and how we changed it to try to help more communities.
Yes, sir. So as mentioned earlier, in 2019, the legislature created the Flood Infrastructure Fund, and Texas had to rely primarily on FEMA methodology for benefit cost analysis. BCA, we look at the cost of the program, or the project, excuse me, and try to determine, to ensure that the benefit is greater than the cost. We just use a flat 1.0 kind of limit. And that's standard when you look at other states, when you look at federal efforts to mitigate flood. But to Representative Wally's point, you have certain communities that face just unavoidable challenges determining the benefit of needed flood mitigation projects. And there were elements of the benefit that the FEMA model, frankly, didn't account for. So our staff oftentimes works directly with communities, simply saying, tell us what these additional benefits are so that we can work together to quantify them and possibly incorporate them into their final BCA. But that wasn't always enough. And so through the direction and leadership of this committee, we had a hearing about this a couple, 3 years ago in the interim leading up to the 2023 session. We embarked on an effort to develop a BCA guidance that would look at a variety of methodologies and BCA models that communities could then rely on. So they have essentially more options to work when they analyze their projects to determine that benefit, so that we can then consider that when applications come in. So it's been, to date, I believe, very successful for communities. We're about to start allocating some of those additional dollars that we received last session for the Flood Infrastructure Fund. So I think you'll see communities, certainly that you represent and throughout the state, have better options with respect to determining their benefits.
Yeah, that'd be helpful is once you make those decisions, or if they've already been made, that you inform the committee about
Sure.
where those projects are. The other last 2 points were obviously the governor has made water infrastructure, obviously an emergency item. I guess whatever is being debated on the Senate side and whatever we do on the House side, there's different buckets of water programs that you administer. What would be, if you had the ability to provide your input to this committee, what would be a recommendation if you had a tranche of dollars where we would best allocate those dollars in the most cost-effective way to help the most people, and not pit communities against each other, right? Because I'm sensitive to rural communities, I'm sensitive to all Texans, but also know how this cost-benefit analysis worked, and I applaud y'all for trying to change that, because some of our communities felt we were getting shafted by the program. But what do you see on the horizon on where we can best allocate those dollars?
Brian, why don't I start?
Right, because I'm sorry, because
No,
we're
that's
gonna
okay.
we're gonna spend some dollars in this.
Yeah.
It's really where we're gonna prioritize, and I'd rather see us be more productive and help as many communities as we can than not.
Thank you for the question, Representative Wally. And we have not done a detailed analysis of, right now it's $2.5 billion. We understand that the Senate and the House are going through the legislative process to decide how much and, will that money be invested similar to SWIFT? Will there be targets in the bill, or how it all will be laid out? I will just say generally, what we have found is that, and I talked about this, really in my mind, there are two buckets. We need funding for existing infrastructure, and we've talked about that, right? What you talked about with the city of Houston. Actually, we had a chance to visit one of their plants, and they took us around and showed us the aging infrastructure that they have. So that bucket, as well as with the growing population and growing water demands, we have to find new supply and look for new sources of water. So in my mind, it's two buckets. Now, as I mentioned, how that pie is split up, we could use funding in all of our programs, but there's some high use programs I want to identify for the committee, and we've talked about those. There's SWIFT, there's the SRFs, there's DFund, there's RWAF because of the flexibility, and then of course the umbrella fund. So funding in all of those would be beneficial. And what I will say for the Texas Water Fund, what we learned, because the board got a $1 billion and then we had to decide how to cut up the pie. And we went into it with a few things in mind. How to spread the money across the state to, the small and large communities, basically. How to meet the deliverables that were called out in the legislation focused on water loss, conservation, and those sorts of things. And then, as a board, we thought, it would be great to be able to leverage some of that money so we could fund more projects. And so having the flexibility that was afforded to us by the legislature through the Texas Water Fund was very beneficial for the board, and I think very beneficial for Texas because what we could do every year, although we've allocated this $1 billion, but in the future, if that's the way the legislature moves forward, we could look at the needs every year, look at those intended use plans, look at where the demand is, and make a judgment call as to how to split up the pie. But certainly we are certainly deferential to the legislative process, but those are the things that we would consider when looking at those issues.
My last point here is the last session, I think I served on a select committee on AI. There was a lot of data center. You talk about new sources of water, let alone the population growth, 30 plus million people. You also have these emerging technology, data centers, and I don't even know what else you call them, but I guess Bitcoin mining is another high use, water and infrastructure use. Is the department looking at that as far as you mentioned two buckets of water, 2 buckets of funding, existing infrastructure, new water supply for what I would assume is for the population growth, but a subset of that new water source is to pipe this infrastructure into these new high use water supply.
Well, and I think, Representative Walling,
areas.
I think that is one of the benefits of having the state water planning process. And Brian can add if he would like to my answer. The fact that we look, it's a bottom-up approach. It's the regional groups who are on the ground. If folks are in their area, industries are coming to their areas, like for example here, Samsung to Taylor. The regional planning groups can look at what industries are coming to their area, what the water needs are, and then make adjustments to their plan, and then we roll it up at the state level. I think that's really a significant benefit of the water planning process. That way it can be adapted as quickly as possible. I mean, it's a 5-year process, but they're actively working on that now. So I think that's where we would get our information. Brian, anything to add?
Yeah, I think we rely heavily on those regional water planning groups for the planning process. That is kind of a 50-year outlook,
Right.
And we kind of refresh that process every 5 years. But large projects, whether they're technologically oriented or they're high water need projects, they come up, right?
Okay.
And so those communities, we have the state divided into several regional water project development teams. Communities all the time call us saying, hey, we've got a new chip plant coming in and we need to identify a water source. And so we work with those communities not only to help them partner with entities that can provide that water, but then we can provide necessary financing. So it's an iterative process. It's a very dynamic process with, the Texas Miracle and our robust economy. But with the emergence of the tech sector, we are seeing more tech-specific water needs throughout the state.
I guess just to pin y'all down though, I guess is there an official I don't want to say document, but are y'all documenting these new or incorporating these new technology, high use technology, data centers, Bitcoins, semiconductors? Are you implementing that or incorporating those new uses into the state water plan, or I just want to make sure we get that on the record.
Regional water planning groups, I think, historically have looked at data center water needs as a municipal need, and I think we're seeing a shift to identify those needs in industrial, and so what that means is the industrial representatives in those areas, they're working with fellow industry to identify those so that we have a clearer picture of those water needs identified as industrial need as opposed to less clear as municipal. Does that make sense?
I need more clarification on that, right? Because what I'm concerned about is that we're not planning for the future well enough when we have these new industries coming into the state of Texas. And we want them. I'm not saying we're not saying that we shouldn't attract new businesses, but if you're pitting, these particular industries with the agricultural needs in this state or the water needs in all these municipalities, that's what I'm concerned about, and I just want to make sure that y'all as an agency have the wherewithal, or at least thinking about that,
Yes, sir.
because I know that there's partnerships between municipalities and the industry, whether it's in the petrochemical industry, but in this new technology, that we're not pitting the industry versus the folks that that need water.
It is a challenging balance.
Okay.
Oh. We
I'm
can-
listening.
we can
I'm
get-
listening.
We can get you some more information. We'll talk to our planning folks and get you more specifics.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
both.
Yes, sir.
Representative Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several things I was going to ask have already been asked, or y'all have done them in your presentation, but I am very curious about how to designate how the pots of money are best used to get the most bang for the buck, and are spread out efficiently and effectively and fairly. It seems to me, if I understand correctly, that we as a legislative body have approved different pots of money, different buckets
Over the years.
over the years, right? And that then some have more flexibility than others. Is that a fair statement? Do we kind of prescribe sometime how?
So the Texas Water Fund that was approved during the last session is an umbrella fund
Right.
that's really flexible because we can move money to the different funding.
There was a couple you said
sources.
that couldn't be in there though, right?
Yes.
Ag Fund, EDAP, and currently the Flood Infrastructure Fund. Yes, ma'am.
But those could be pulled into that
If the legislature desires.
would it be advantageous to y'all's planning and decision-making to have everything under your umbrella?
That would certainly afford more flexibility. I think in the 2023 session, the focus was on water supply and infrastructure. The legislature, in addition to the $1 billion that was appropriated into the water fund, appropriated $625 million into the FIF, the Flood Infrastructure Fund. So there was, complementing
Yeah, right.
efforts
Yeah.
to provide those necessary funds. I think should the legislature want to enhance the flexibility of the water fund, the flexibility that it provides to our board, to allocate available resources to the most pressing needs. Of course, that's a challenge because
There's so many.
water needs, infrastructure needs, wastewater needs, flood needs,
Right.
ag needs. There's tremendous needs throughout the state. But the water fund in its design does afford the advantage of that flexibility to our board so that funds aren't appropriated into an individual fund and then, maybe those aren't needed right then and could be used somewhere else. So it does allow some agility and flexibility to our board to, again, not have to wait till the coming session to ask for more money or not to come, to come to the legislature and say, can we move some of these dollars over here where there's more needed?
And I'll just add, the $1 billion for the Texas Water Fund and up to 25% had to be used for new water supply.
Right.
That was a one-time allocation. So
Right.
the legislature would just have to decide if it's a lump sum plus a dedicated revenue
Right.
source on an ongoing basis, or just, what variations of that. There's several variations of that. That would be another decision for the legislature to make.
Well, I think that Senator Perry's done an excellent job of educating a lot of
Yes.
us, going around the state, talking about all the different water needs that we have that y'all have pointed out in your graphs here. But seriously, it's the entire state has issues.
Yes.
And it's going to affect our communities and what we can drink. It's going to affect our businesses. It's going to affect our energy production because water and energy go hand in hand. And we've already talked about the AI and database, all that stuff. Anyway, the fact is our economy and our very life is dependent upon us having the water that we need. So it would appear to me that with the opportunities we have this session to look at some of the funding options that we have, that we need to consider something similar to what we've done, as y'all saw in the earlier presentation with TxDOT, where you have some kind of dedicated source of revenue that is continually replenished, because you've presented here a water plan that's saying that we need 47 billion from the state, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And we've got to figure out a way to create that fund such that we have something going on in perpetuity to address not only our current needs, but our future needs.
Yes, we believe that would be helpful. And as I mentioned, for example, in the Texas Water Fund, the legislature identified some, I call them goals, water laws, conservation, that sort of thing, rural communities. And so, certainly there's opportunities there, but there is great need across the state, and having a dedicated source of revenue would help all of our funding programs, which in turn help the communities, because we would certainly pass that funding through to the communities.
Well, I've mentioned it before in this committee that I do have a suggestion about how we could do that, which I'm going to continue to talk about, but for another time. But the idea, I think, is that we have some kind of, the umbrella fund with the different buckets underneath it, with the bottom-up approach that y'all have with regional water plans that look at what the actual people in the area determine that they need. And y'all put that together into your state water plan and then make determinations about how to invest those funds, but do it knowing that you're going to continue to have replenishing of those buckets.
Yes, certainly having a dedicated source of revenue, and even plus one-time funding, all of those options would be helpful for water funding in Texas.
Thank you.
Representative Kitzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They've covered most of what I wanted to say, but the two moments of panic and tragedy are when you turn on the faucet and nothing comes out, and when you've got water running where you don't want it to, like your living room or wherever that might be. But I appreciate you mentioning ag. That's a part of this that no one's talking about as well. We've got farmers going to be out of business very soon if they don't get better sources of water that they can afford. But the work you're doing is huge. You know that. Your own graphs show us that no matter what we're talking about passing this session, is still, no pun intended, a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed. The great Texas miracle comes to a grinding halt if we don't take care of these water issues. And I appreciate the legislature and my colleagues this session being more sensitive to that, more aware of it than maybe before. But it's a testimony of the modern age we live in, the convenience that we have to have water, and that most of the time that water is taken away without much problem. But it doesn't have to be that way, and you're the ones that they're going to have to try to protect us all from that. And so thank you for what you're doing. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you so
Chairman.
much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Representative Lopez.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a big role, right?
Yes.
Well, you have the wisdom, you have the experience, you all are very diligent on what you do. Your staff is amazing. Just want to thank you all for all the support and always making yourselves available. You're a phone call away, even on weekends. You all didn't hear that, okay? We're going to start calling you too. But I appreciate you all so much. The dire need that we're in, as Representative Kitzman said, in the southern area of Texas, in the valley, we have two sources where we get water from, Falcon and Amistad. And although we're not in drought, our reservoirs are, and so we're down at 20% when it comes to our water levels or less. So my sugarcane shut down already, 500 jobs lost. My citrus is in danger right now, and next is my vegetable growers. And so when you're saying you're thinking of doing something for the ag community, that was very, very important to me when you brought that up. So if you can explain that a little bit, but also want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing with the flood plan. It's amazing. Texas is the only one that has a flood plan. So thank you for that, and thanks for involving South Texas in this as well and giving us a voice.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let Brian talk about the ag portion, but Representative Lopez, I understand what your community is going through. I worked on treaty compliance for 11 years, and the reservoirs are at record lows. The Rio Grande's at record. The deliveries are at record lows. And when I first joined the board, I took a trip to Brownsville, and what I toured was a desal plant, and they were piping water from 6 miles away, which is close for some communities. Some communities are 60 miles away that they pipe the water from. But I was really impressed at the resiliency of the community. They had no choice but to look for alternative water supplies. And I just want you and the committee to know that the board stands ready to help them and to be a resource for them where we can in the situation that you have going on in South Texas. So thank you so much. Brian, do you want to talk about ag?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Representative Lopez. So one of our exceptional items is asking for $6 million. That would be $3 million a year to replenish our ag water conservation fund. This is a fund that we use to allocate primarily to groundwater conservation districts that ag producers can utilize for, relining canals or high efficiency irrigation systems, automated irrigation systems. Pound for pound, the ag fund, even though it's relatively small compared to some of our other financial assistance programs, saves a tremendous amount of water for a community, for the ag sector that needs all the help they can get. We're also asking for a few FTEs to help with technical assistance, to help with outreach, get the word out to those ag producers so that they know this resource is available, help them with grant management, things like that. And so I know that subcommittees may be meeting soon to dive into our specific requests. Look forward to working with the subcommittee and the entire committee to address those needs. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you all so much.
Representative Villalobos.
I'll be quick. It's already
Yes, ma'am.
past 5 o'clock. I wanted to thank you all for y'all's work with the city of Corpus Christi with granting funding for our seawater desal, the first municipality seawater desal that we will have in the state of Texas. Amazing work there. We do have one more priority that I just wanted to, make everyone's attention to is we are about to hit a water cliff, so you call it, in Corpus Christi this summer. From between June and August, we will hit the next stage of water emergency within the city of Corpus Christi. At that point in time, the city will then turn to industry and ask them to reduce their water usage by an additional 10 to 30%. That cannot happen for the Texas economy. We will lose billions of dollars. I work at Flint Hills Resources, and we supply all the jet fuel for American Airlines. You will see less flights coming out of DFW because of the water crisis that is happening in Corpus Christi right now. Everything we're talking about is great. I wish it could have been done 5-10 years ago. In the short term, Janie's already lost jobs in her community. We're on the verge of having the same thing happen in Corpus, and let alone affecting the state, national, and international economy. We supply all the LNG for Europe through our Cheniere refinery. Humongous issue. What can the water board do to help step in the short time period while we're trying to seek funding for years on and better our infrastructure? And then also, are we looking at trying to protect the state and residents, like kind of what Wally was saying on overzealous communities and selling water rights that they may not have?
I don't think that second part is under our authority.
Okay.
But the first part?
Yeah, so we have a series of time periods, solicitations that communities can apply for our funding. And so I would encourage not just Corpus Christi, but any communities throughout your districts, if they're facing pressing water needs, to take full advantage of all those opportunities. They typically run on an annual cycle, so communities do not want to miss. In early March, we have a deadline coming up for our SRFs. And so if Corpus isn't already planning to submit maybe some drinking water SRF applications, I would encourage them to do so. We don't have a tremendous amount of short-term financing. We do have some kind of emergency related, if it was a disaster or if they're facing extreme drought, we can facilitate funding instead of maybe a year, we can get it out the door in 6 to 9 months. But if they are recognizing that cliff that's coming and they want to explore those options, again, encourage them to get in touch with our regional planning or project water development teams. We see this here and there throughout the state, and we do everything we can not only to address their long-term financing needs, but also to identify other both state and federal entities that can help in the short term. So happy to help as we're able.
Okay, thank you for that. I will definitely be meeting with your office. It is a crisis for our city and our economy. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, members, any other questions? Well, thank you for being with
Thank
us.
you so much.
We appreciate everything that you guys do.
Thank you, Chairman.
Members, that
Thank you, members.
concludes the testimony for today. Subcommittee assignments have been distributed to your committee mailbox. The assignments will be reflected in the committee